call this public session to order. I'll entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
I move that we adopt the agenda.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you. Now it's time for our public comment period. Persons may speak on the item listed below. Speakers are requested to state their names and addresses before addressing the board. Individual speakers are asked to limit their comments for any item to not more than 3 minutes in order to allow everyone who wishes to speak the opportunity to do so. Groups are asked to limit comments to a total of 10 minutes. We're now going to hold a public hearing on general waiver application for equity length of time.
Maybe there was a public.
I think there's public.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, hi. Can I just quickly make a quick comment?
Yeah, is it going to be on TK?
It's on, on TK?
Yeah, is
Well,
it going to be on EDK?
EDK.
Okay.
It's not
Oh, okay.
specifically related.
So if it's not on
Item
the waiver,
3.
then now's your time to speak.
Okay, right, okay.
Thanks, Allison.
Okay, so
Thank you, sir. for pointing that out.
Hi, nice to see all of you, and thanks for taking my comment. They actually didn't prepare anything formal, so I just want to sort of reiterate.
If you could just state your name.
Oh, Allison Coburn,
Thank you.
5 Lenoria,
Thanks.
Orinda. And I think most of you here are very aware of my concerns about EDK, and a lot of it is the long day, and specifically the instructional minutes for such young children entering kindergarten. So I see that this is sort of moving forward, and what I've hoped to come up with is kind of a win-win for both parents and the children, especially the young children. My son will be entering kindergarten as a summer birthday, is just turned 5-year-old boy. And I want to make sure that the curriculum is appropriate, developmentally appropriate for him and all the other kids, roughly that age. So as kind of a compromise and hopefully a win-win, I just would encourage the board to seriously consider limiting it, not maxing out on the instructional minutes and the day, 5 days, 5 hours a day, but doing what a lot of other schools and maybe all of the other schools have adopted EDK, which is having an early release day. So one of those days, the kid still gets to come home. Kids at that age still, again, need a lot of unstructured play and time with their parents. So at least one day a week, they could have that early release day, coming home and having that time that they need. And then secondly, again, not having an entire 5 hours, but reducing it. Danville and some other schools have 4.5 hours, whether it's what Gloria had last year that they really liked so much, just the recess and lunch, or instead of an additional 45, 55 minutes of instructional time, make it 20 minutes of additional instructional time, and then still leaving that longer recess if we want. Those are my 2 main things I want to just highlight, and it's sort of in line with the what you guys are discussing today with the waiver, because it's the same thing. The TK parents don't want their kids in for that long either, and we're kind of getting that for the TKs, and my son is going to be almost TK age. So, thanks so much.
Thanks, Allison. Any other public comment? Now it's time for a public hearing on the general waiver application for equity length of time for transitional kindergarten. Public hearing's open. Ask for comments. Any comments on this item?
It's kind of an odd thing.
Close it.
Okay.
Seeing none? Public hearing's closed. Next we go to the action item. Okay. Next we have an action item, the general waiver application for equity length of time for transitional kindergarten. The Director of Curriculum Instruction will present the waiver, allowing the transitional kindergarten program to remain at the current level of instructional minutes of 210 minutes per day. Kathy.
Attached to your agenda bill this evening is a draft waiver request for equity length of time, specifically focusing on transitional kindergarten to remain at their current level of minutes of 210 minutes. As we are considering and planning for a longer day for kindergarten students next year. So the outline of the information on the waiver request includes all of the requirements that are needed prior to submitting a request. We have taken this to school site councils at every elementary school. Both bargaining units have weighed in on it, and at each juncture we received support for this to move it forward. We just had the public hearing, and the next step is board approval. If we receive board approval, then we can proceed to submit the waiver request. And it is anticipated that it would proceed then to the July state board agenda for review and approval. So I have it before you. I've been in communication with the waiver office at the Department of Education. I've asked them to review our draft to make sure that we are consistent with other waivers that have been approved, and I haven't received any objections so far. So I'm available for any questions that you might have on this request.
So Kathy, thank you for preparing this so quickly. Do you know if it gets to them in time for their June meeting, do they make a decision right then?
Well, it will go to, it's actually their meeting is July 8th, 7th or 8th.
Okay.
And they would approve it at that meeting, and
So they do it in public at the meeting?
Yes.
And you find out right
and,
then?
and you'll see it posted on their website
Okay.
as an agenda item as well. And then I've been informed that we would know the very next day.
Okay.
As a follow-up question, is there any need for you or anyone from our district office to go to that Zoom meeting to answer questions or anything?
They haven't indicated that we need to do that. They have several districts, many districts throughout California who have submitted similar waivers. And I'm not aware of anyone that's gone up there, but it's possible. I can certainly ask.
Yeah, I just would hate it to not get approved for, some confusion of anything. But it sounds like if you talk to them, that's great. Thank you for doing this preparation.
And then it's a 2-year waiver.
We're applying for that. We'll see if we get approved for that. That's the most.
That's the most you can go for. So they could do that, or they could choose to do a 1 year.
Or 1 year.
0, I guess.
Yeah, I've reviewed some waivers that have been submitted, and some are even approved with conditions,
Okay.
and varying conditions. So it just depends what is.
What kind of
decided.
conditions, report back to us
Yes.
about how it's going?
In 1 year.
Have you seen any denials?
I haven't.
And I forget, is this waiver written where it would start right when school starts?
It's actually written to start, approximately the 3rd week of September, because we're talking about all the students having the same number of minutes at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, I guess I'll ask, and this is the only submission, they don't require any more detailed information about the curriculum or the plan that we're building for extended kindergarten?
No, it's completely separate from what the information they provided to me.
Got it.
Anything from the public? Anything else from the board? This item's on for action.
I move that we approve the general waiver application for equity limited time for TK.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the general waiver application, does this have to be a?
No.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. Appreciate it. Okay, next we're going to start our board governance workshop and dinner and discussion of individual board member priorities for 2015 and 16. Legal counsel Harold Freeman and Zana Smith will conduct governance workshop for the board for the superintendent. Board members will identify their priorities for the district for 2015 and 2016. Hello, Harold. Hey. If anybody wants to grab a bite to eat, I'm going to get up and grab a sandwich. I do best when I'm not hungry. My best governance work.
If anybody needs a copy, we're still working from the same PowerPoint, so you can just pass around.
Okay, just sit. I'm trying to catch you.
Yes, thank you. You're the second
Excellent.
Thank you.
I was gonna start with
I have to try one more if I get a 10.
You never know what will follow.
I know, I am all, makes me eat less, but I'll keep coming
How are
back.
you?
I'm good, how are you doing?
I'm good, and I did bring my PowerPoint.
The ones and only ones that I go to work with, thinking I didn't bring extra copies of what we've been working on the prior time, and it only takes one time to realize that we only do that once.
Exactly where we are, but sure you'll refresh us.
I will refresh everybody.
I think we've been all over the map.
Yes,
And it
that's
is-
Yeah. But as we cover each one, I check it off, so I actually know which ones we've already hit.
Smart.
I think I have the tail end of what my son had last week.
Did anyone else need the PowerPoint?
I have mine, thank you.
Not a problem.
Oh, look. That's what it is. What page do we start on, Carol?
We're going to be starting on the bottom of page 10, but we're going to be skipping some things as we go because we actually covered a number of, as you remember, we were bouncing around last time. Everybody settled in? Get started with that. Well, thank you for having me back again. We actually get to finish these materials tonight, which I'm excited about. Just to give you a little roadmap of what is going to be taking place tonight, I'm going to finish running through the rest of the PowerPoint. A lot of it is some pieces we covered that I'll be able to pass over. Some of it is just a little bit of a refresher. But the goal is to get through the rest of that and then get to the parking lot issues, which were by my count, I think there were 7 issues that we'd identified to come back and talk about. So we will come back to those and I'll help walk you through what those are. And then when that is done, a little bit of a discussion about the protocols concept that we talked about before, which is really just my attempt to sort of put my hands in your back and push you forward because that's a discussion for all of you. Probably not tonight, but some point in the future to chat about what protocols we want to develop, but maybe starting some of that tonight. And then the rest of it is really up to all of you. So it'll be a sort of roundtable on your priorities for 2015, 2016. Just to remind you all under the Brown Act, you can't act on anything tonight. There's no action item on that. So you're merely identifying what you individually would like to see in the next couple of years. And I'm happy to play the police when we get to those items. Whenever we do this with the board, it's always challenging because you want to start talking about the substance. And we can't because it's not agendized, but we can identify the issues. And if there's questions about, somebody says something and you didn't understand what the priority was, you can certainly ask. So.
But there's a danger of us reaching consensus,
Correct.
sharing our support. If Sarah says my priority is A and I say, wow, that's a great idea, we should stay away from that?
I think you should just list the priorities and you'll have more opportunity to come back in the
Okay.
future and talk
Thanks.
about where to
Thanks
go on that.
That's helpful, and we can decide what action.
I get very enthusiastic.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I mean, frankly, if it's just a matter, if I had that on my list too, I don't think that's a violation of anything.
Okay.
Or questions of clarification, I don't think are a problem. But again, I'm happy to be, that's a part I can either step out for, or I can stick around to raise flags just in case I
Okay.
see it going in a direction that may go too far. for the
Thank you.
agenda. Okay, so let's,
Harold, could I just comment that, the parking lot issues that had come up, I understand they came up, so put them aside, so we should address them in some way. But, you know, my fear is that we spend such a long time on this and the parking lot issues, and then have hardly any time for the, you know, priorities and goals, which I think is really important. And I've said before, it feels to me like we have to have an idea of where we're going so that we can agree on how to get there. So, I just want to bring that up. I didn't want to have to feel like we had to thoroughly analyze every parking lot issue just because it came up. You know, some may take more time than others and all that.
Sure. No, I'm very sensitive to that as well. So the thought really is to finish up on the PowerPoint where I'll probably be throwing some stuff out with you and inviting a little less comment than usual. But by no means let me stop you if you do have something you want to comment on. The parking lot issues I leave up to all of you as to how much time you want to spend on them. But I would think that we'd want to have at least a half hour to 45 minutes at the end to go around the room and discuss the priorities. So in my mind, 5 to 10 minutes per person kind of thing. So that certainly would be my goal to help keep on track to get there.
Okay,
Great. So just to remind everybody where we left off, we were at the bottom of page 10. We had just been talking about the role of the board, and we'll be talking more about that as we go through this. But we left off at the bottom of page 10 because we talked about the role of the board. We were about to talk about the role of the superintendent, and so then we can see how they connect. So just to, again, also remind you, we've gotten to the point of the presentation, we're really talking about your policies now. This is no longer data from nationwide and the things we started on. This is what your bylaws say. So starting down at the bottom, the board's role is to work with the superintendent to fulfill its major roles. The only reason I include that there is you'll see this theme come up again and again, work with the superintendent. There's definitely a team concept that we talked about last time that gets picked up through the policies that I'll point out as we go. So then you go to the top of page 11, just a few notes on that governance team. These are notions, I guess I misrepresented. I wasn't going to talk about some national data because this goes back to the national data again, but just in brief. About schools operating best when there's this strong partnership between the board and the superintendent. And the general wisdom is that you don't just get partnership by announcing we're a partner now. You have to work at it, it's cultivated. It's inclusion of the superintendent at the table when you have your board workshop, when you develop your protocols, when you develop your policies. So that's really what that's talking about. And when we talked about, right below that, a little bit before too, about the governance team, there's that notion of the board working together. And you've got the guys rowing the boat. That's always my analogy. Remember elsewhere we had a picture maybe coming up of two people rowing in an opposite direction in a canoe. It means you just go slowly in circles. There's definitely, and I've used this analogy with you before and I will again, a moment where when you're rowing all in unison, the boat's just humming along and all it takes is one person getting slightly out of rhythm. And for anybody who's ever done rowing before, it's called catching a crab. The oar hits the water, snaps back, hits whoever the rower was that's out of sequence in the stomach, knocks the wind out of them, and the boat just immediately slows down. I mean, it's like putting the brakes on. It's incredible. So you have one of those in a race at a high level, and the race is over. You can't come back from that. Maybe you can get fourth place, but you're not going to finish in the top three. And it doesn't matter how far out ahead you are. And that's the board. You're rowing together, you're not. When you're not rowing together, the crab gets caught again. And so the key is, have you figured out where you're going? It's really easy to say row in unison, but if you don't know where you're going, it's kind of hard to set the destination and to row in unison. So it's not always about agreeing. It's not always about knowing what you're doing. It's about setting the goals, setting your objectives. We'll talk more about your individual goals and thoughts today. But setting those and then figuring out what the rules of operation are to get you there, to do that rowing in unison. So again, I distinguish agreeing is one thing, that's a lovely thing, it doesn't always happen. Following the same rules, following the same process, working together as a team to get there, that's the key part of this. There's a good quote down at the bottom, which I really do like from this How Not to Be a Terrible School Board Member, a terribly named book, but a good book nonetheless. An ongoing part of your job as a board member is to cultivate an atmosphere of mutual respect. This cultivation must be renewed at each board meeting as reflected in the way you listen and speak. And what that's really getting at is this governance in a fishbowl notion that I like to talk about, which is you get to run a business, you get to run the business of Orinda School District in a fishbowl, with everybody watching absolutely everything you're doing, and making judgments about what you're doing, sometimes just sitting in the audience watching. So the way that you interact is the way you cultivate this respect. And I think beyond the respect, it's also how you cultivate trust. We talked last time about how do you come to trust one another. There's that trust pool sometimes you just have to jump into. You build trust with each other in the way you interact. Whether it's 2 of you on a street corner or it's 5 of you here in the boardroom. And I'd add to that the notion above, the superintendent's part of the team. Staff is part of the team, and teachers are part of the team. When teachers feel respected and heard, it's a different relationship with the board. When you work closely with your administration, again, doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but there's that rowing together notion, and that's really an important part of governance. So that takes us to page 12, so we're flying through these tonight, to talk a little bit about your board policy at the top. And this is a tough part for all board members, I think. Your board bylaw, like most board bylaws, says a board member has no individual authority. That is legally true. None of you individually are authorized to bind the district to anything unless the board has delegated authority to that person to sign something, for example. And it goes on to say, individual members of the board shall not exercise any administrative responsibility with respect to the schools or command the services of any school employee. So I want to break that down a little bit. Not exercising any administrative responsibility. So administrative responsibility is generally interpreted as the day-to-day operations. It's what's going on the ground, if you will. You all are in command central. You're setting policies. You're deciding which way the ship is going to go. On a day-to-day basis, you're not in there doing the handwork. And we talked last time again about the difference between head work and handwork. It's the hardest thing for board members, I think, especially sometimes newer board members, because you got on the board because you're actively involved in the schools. You've heard me say this before, you like to get your fingernails dirty. And then you get on the board and all of a sudden you're reading thick reports, and you're not the one who's in there digging the trench and getting your fingernails dirty. And it's a radical shift in the role you play. But it's stated right there in the policy that they, never the two shall meet. And it goes on to say, commanding the services, you're not going to command the services of any school employee. So what does commanding the services mean? It means you are directing as an individual, I want this done, I want this provided, whatever else that it is, to a school employee. Now note, it says a school employee. It doesn't say the superintendent. And we'll talk more about that. This is talking about a principal, a teacher, a school secretary. So one of the things that's very confusing is if you're the CEO of a major corporation, or on the board of a major corporation, you can walk into any site they've got and pretty much tell somebody, it's the Dairy Queen franchise, change this machine, and they'll do it. That's not the role of the school board, as stated in your policies. You're not the one that's talking to the principal, it's talking to the assistant principal saying, I'm worried about this, I'm concerned about that. That's why you have a superintendent, that's why you have an HR director. There's a chain of command issue, and there's reasons for it that are noted in the slide right below that. It basically leads to ineffective management. You get into a situation where you have people who don't know who they work for. They don't know if you're speaking to them individually, if you're speaking on behalf of the board. You can say, I'm not here on behalf of the board, but they know you're on board. They know you're ultimately up the chain, a person responsible for hiring and firing. It's a different effect on them, even if you say, I'm not here as a board member. Really tricky thing, by the way, for parents who are board members who have kids in the schools, because you want to make very clear when you're talking to your kid's teacher, I'm here as the parent. I'm not here as the board member. The way that I walk that fine line, I think I mentioned before, in my home school district, where I'm also the lawyer for the district, is when there's a question to be asked. My son's on a 504 plan, for example. If there's a 504 issue that comes up, my wife takes care of it. And because I don't want the person sitting at the table to behave differently, because they know if there's a legal question that comes up about it, it's going back to my law firm. And then that's going to sort of hinder the way that they're thinking about it. So there's the management issues, and then this next bullet, which is one I greatly believe in, a lack of understanding regarding the role and function of the board and superintendent results in confusion and misunderstanding among board members, superintendent, staff, and the community. Confusion and misunderstanding. You walk around with nobody quite sure who's in which role at what given moment, who's making the decision. And you don't want the superintendent to be the decision maker on all policy for the district, just like you don't want the board to be the ones carrying out all of the policy implemented in the district. And that's where you run into trouble. There's a good quote, this is this book I keep quoting you from, Doing Good Even Better. It's really about nonprofits, it's not about school boards, but it's got great information for anybody who's on a non-traditional type of board. The guy who wrote it is the former chair of Habitat for Humanity, and actually is credited with totally turning that organization around from a fairly floundering group to this massive, successful organization. I think under his leadership, they dropped the total amount of every dollar that they took in that went to administration was about 25 cents, and when he left, it was something like 5 cents or 3 cents, somewhere in that range. So he did a good job with this group. There's this quote down at the bottom of page 12 from him that just gets at these same issues. Failure to make this distinction, that's the distinction between the board role, the superintendent role, etc., results in overburdening the board while management is demoralized and uncertain about its role. Boards which are involved in operations at the expense of their governance function are an impediment and perpetually on the verge of exhaustion. Perpetually on the verge of exhaustion. The districts I work with, and I've had a lot of this before, where these roles haven't clearly been defined, they are at that point of exhaustion because there are people in boats that are rowing in opposite directions at the same time, which is very exhausting. And Stokes really does a good job of discussing that in his book. Your staff begins to feel like they were not hired for a reason because they think you are doing their job for them as opposed to giving them direction. You're actually doing it. And from the board, it is exhausting because you're doing both jobs. So there's a key element here, and related to all of this, it keeps coming back to the theme of trust. If a board usurps the authority of its staff, if it starts doing its staff's job, people in the district will lose faith in the staff because why go to the staff when you can go to the board if the board's going to do it? The staff loses trust in the board because you hired us to do a reason, now you're telling us don't do this particular job we were supposed to do. The board begins to lose trust in one another because they get confused in their roles as to, is somebody stepping out of this sort of rowing in order and going off and starting to do the district job. I mean, at all layers, there's this loss of trust, which is when you take all of this apart, I think the biggest part of it. I know in my organization, in my law firm, if I assign work to somebody, and then at some point I get impatient and I go do the work, it tears that person down like you wouldn't believe. Whether it's my secretary and I ask her to make copies of something and it's 2 o'clock and I'm getting antsy because I have to go, and I walk into her office and I say, I'll take care of it. I'll go make, or even worse, I just go make the copies. I've been known to do that. And then suddenly she's wondering why she's got a job, and it's demoralizing for her. It's a really key component of establishing the trust, which also means sometimes I give projects to people where I'm not 100% sure they're going to succeed. And I watch what they do, and I review it with them, and I go over it with them, and I use it as a learning experience, but I have to allow them to fail. I have to give them the tools to succeed, and then I have to allow them to fail, even though I know it's easier to go do it myself. And I don't think that's unique to school boards. I think that's in every organization. What is unique to you is you have an interesting funnel, because you've got the board hires the superintendent, and the superintendent is the one who primarily brings other employees forward for hiring, promotions, and whatnot. Whereas in most of the corporate world, there's a whole lot more hierarchy than that. You've got the board, the superintendent, usually the cabinet, and then the staff. And that's it. And one jumping out of a board member role into any of those different levels just sort of tightens up that funnel and things aren't flowing like they're supposed to. And that's really the governance issue to take care of. So what that leads us to, on page 13, I'm just going to run through these really quickly. These are realities for you as board members. And the reason we say realities apply as a school board member, I particularly use this when we're talking to new school board members, and we've done this at CSBA for new members, for example, because they're the big switch to how you govern. The first one we just talked about, you can only collectively make decisions. You can't individually direct. Yeah.
Can you pause for a second? Rather than just ripping through this. So it looks like this part, you're going through our role as board member, but just reflecting back on the page that we just finished. it seems like, I don't think anyone would ever do anything purposely to create distrust, but it seems like the problem could come up if it's not clear how to go about things. For example, how to get something on the agenda quicker, or whether something is something that should be on the agenda, or just brought up to the superintendent, or all those things. So is that going to be later in your PowerPoint, or what?
Well, that particular point we're gonna talk about on the parking lot issues, on the adding items to the agenda. The protocols piece, which we're gonna start in on today, really can start getting at some of those issues. And it's up to all of you to decide, do you wanna be a district that has written protocol? I'm sure here's the rules we live by. Do you want a short list of protocols that are gonna go on the wall? Or do you want the handbook, which is like how CSBA does it, where you've got a handbook that goes through in great detail? This is the role of the board president in setting the agenda. Here's the bullet points, and here's how things come to them. Or you can do a hybrid, which is you have here's the 4, 5, 6 significant things we're putting up on the wall, and then here's the separate, here's the protocols. With some of these things, you already have board policies that address them. So you actually have a really detailed board policy on how items are set on the agenda.
Right. I know, but I'm just saying that relates to what you just said. And I don't know if you're planning to talk about that later, but.
Well, I think that it raises a very good point, which is you can't expect people to act as a board member without telling them how board members are expected to act. It's
Well,
a circular.
yeah, but for me, you aren't a board member just to, we're not all gonna interpret everything exactly the same. For example, we go to parent club meetings and give updates. We're not gonna have the exact same wording because we don't sit there and write it out and script it and say, here's what we should say this month. So there is gonna be a little bit of variation sometimes on things like that. And what I was thinking of a minute ago when you said, well, of course you have protocols. Of course, I'm sure we've all read our protocols or our board policies that tell how we do these things. What we all want is to accomplish the things that are goals, and we're trying to get there, right? We want, the best curriculum, and collaborative processes, and all these big picture things. And we're trying to work together to accomplish all these big picture things. So, I think I see it as figuring out where we're trying to go, and then here's how we're gonna get there, rather than the minutia of following the protocol when we haven't figured out where we're going. So anyway, I think there's just different ways to look at it.
No, I appreciate that. And, again, it's really up to you all to decide how you go about that protocol piece, and how that fits in with all of this. I can't decide for you what your protocols are, and, there's certain objectives, there's certain directions you're going, there's certain things that are legally compelled, you're implementing LCFF, and you're doing certain other things that that's the course that you're on. I think a lot of what we're talking about now are what I keep referring to as the rules of engagement. So as you're going through that, what do you do with the vote? What do you do with the disagreement over one of those issues? One possibility that exists for all of you, and again, it doesn't have to be anything where I'm in the room, is if there are elements where board members aren't sure what they can or can't do, have a workshop where you literally just tackle those. Am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed, what is the board's pleasure on, if X happens, can I do Y? Or if X happens, what is the appropriate next step to do? And we've got specific ones we'll touch on, but obviously not all of them, because there's going to be a host of other these sort of rules of engagement. So that's something we can talk a little bit more when we're talking about protocols, about where you want to take that from there. And it's, one option is you shelve the protocols until you develop goals more. And that's, again, completely up to you. The other is that you tighten up the protocols, because the protocols will help address how you get to the consensus on what the goals are going to be. And that's something that you all get to wrestle with. It's the fun part of your jobs. So, okay. So just running sort of briefly through on page 13 some of these other realities that we like to point out. Number 2 is your role is to see the big picture and is not the day-to-day management of the district. That is the board's role. You are not the employer manager on a day-to-day basis. 3 is representing the needs of all students and decisions being made in the interest of the total school system, not for special groups or special interests. A lot of the districts I work with where things go south is a board member gets on, often who runs on a platform of this is my constituency, and I'm here to represent my constituency. I would submit to you, as soon as you start talking about your constituency, you as a board member have lost sight of the fact that your constituency is the district. And even in those districts that have trustee area elections, which is increasingly happening, people will talk about their constituency as the narrow strip of land that runs down the center of X city, which is where their voters are. That's not your constituency. That's constituency as a school board member. You're different than Congress people, you're different than state assemblymen. You really do represent the entire district, even if you're only elected from part of that district. And so that's a critical thing to keep your eye on. We'll talk more about number 4, supporting the decision of the majority after voicing and voting your different opinion, and how that plays out. We'll come back to that. Number 5 is a reality people don't realize. Sometimes your decisions may alienate your friends. Has anybody on this board, you have to say yes, just think in your head, ever voted in a way that somebody you know or perhaps lives in your house is sorely disappointed by? It's going to happen. And because you represent the whole constituency of the district, you're not going to satisfy everybody. And you can start chasing your tail if you start trying to satisfy everyone on these decisions. Continue on the top of page 14, casual comments to the community being interpreted as the board's position. We've talked about this, and it's a reality again. It's really important that people know whether you're speaking your opinion or you're saying the board has decided that. In some ways, a good way to preface if you disagreed with the board's decision, it's okay to say, the board decided X, I voted against it, I stated my reasons why, it's all, if you want to see the minutes, it's in the minutes, but the board voted X. So people don't think that you're saying it's still an unresolved issue if the vote happened. Board meetings, your board meetings are business-like. You follow established procedures. I like to require board members to be prepared. In this day and age, if you just walk in and start reading the agenda when you get there and the agenda packet, good luck to all of you, because it's, for every district, it's inches and inches thick. And by the way, we're increasingly have districts that are doing this all electronically. So you have board members during meetings that are sitting there with everything on a laptop in front of them. And what we're also increasingly getting is lots of legal questions about what's happening on the, when we see the person typing, I want to see what they're typing. It's during a board meeting, what's happening? I would like to see that turned over. So we're getting Public Records Act requests and disputes and arguments over putting everything electronically. So part of the business-like piece of the meeting is we have some districts that put the agenda on electronically, and they have an agreement amongst all the board that they follow. Nobody does anything else on that computer. They just scroll through the agenda. Because as soon as the audience sees this, they want to know what you're typing. And the worst thing is the board meetings where one board member's typing like this, and you hear ding, and then the board member at the other end is typing like that. And we have those districts.
San Francisco City Council, or Board of Supervisors.
Mm-hmm. And even, I always appreciated, I was at a board meeting once where a board member said, our protocol is to leave our phones off, so we're not checking. I have a sick kid at home, I'm leaving it on for that purpose. If I get a text from them, I'm going to excuse myself, and you'll know that's what I'm looking at when I leave. And it was very comforting to the audience, because what I've also seen is a board where the board is meeting, and you see a member of the public going like this, and then you see a board member doing this back, and then the board member of the public does this. That's arguably all public record. That's all going to get requested and have to be turned over. Plus, it's a meeting that's happening within a meeting. There's so many things wrong with it. So part of those having protocols, you have to think through all of these different pieces and what your rules are going to be. Number 8, another critical reality: privileged and confidential information must remain confidential and privileged. If it doesn't, there's all sorts of laws that get violated. There's all sorts of rights that are interfered with. And I will tell you right now, just as I've said with the Brown Act, just as I say with a lot of laws you deal with, most breaches of confidentiality I've come across are completely inadvertent. They're not because somebody was sneaking out in the dark at night saying, this is what we discussed in closed session. You all know a lot of people, you're on different committees, you're involved in the community. It's sometimes hard to remember who said what to whom. I love it when I hear a board member talking to somebody and they stop themselves and they say, wait a minute, I don't know if I can talk about that. Let me go back and check, because I can't remember if that was a closed session issue. That means they've got the little voice, little angel on their shoulder that's telling them to cut it out. before you go too far. Legally, just so you're aware, if you reveal confidential information and it can be shown it was for pecuniary gain, so you're going to somehow come out ahead, that is a crime in California. You can be prosecuted, you can be fined for it. Fortunately, I have not seen a lot of those in my career. Again, they're usually inadvertent disclosures. So if you're not sure if you can talk to somebody about something, check. If you can't remember whether it was discussed in open session or closed session, check. If you can't remember whether it was a letter from the attorney or it was a letter from the parent, check. Always stop yourself and sort of ask that question. Number 9, we talked about before. After all these years, you discover that you really don't like surprises. Board members, the more they're on the board, the more they realize when a surprise comes to them, whether it's you're hearing about something for the first time at a board meeting that happened 3 weeks ago at a school site, and you feel like you should have been updated on that, that's a surprise. You're hearing that a board member has met with the city council about something, or met with the mayor about something that's within the district's jurisdiction. That's a surprise. So letting each other know where you are, what you're doing. I have one superintendent who jokes about the bells that she, every time somebody's put on a board, she actually gives them a little like cowbell. And she jokes, you're now wearing this bell, I need to know where you are and who you're talking to. Because that's how I know Brown Act's not being violated, that's how I know the rest of us are keeping up. And she has one board president who actually wears the bell to board meetings. Convenes the meeting by ringing the bell, which I think is kind of cute.
Harold, you just said letting each other know. How are you suggesting we do that?
So part of
Say
it,
somebody was going to do what you said, go have a meeting with the mayor or whatever. Are you saying notify the superintendent, notify everybody? What
well,
exactly?
notifying everybody becomes the Brown Act
Yeah,
problem.
that's
So,
what I
so you know,
thought.
decide who the conduit will be, whether it's usually either the board president or the superintendent. It's easier to have it be the superintendent because then you don't have any Brown Act issue. You haven't even had 2 board members talk yet. So that could be a good conduit. And have some rules up front. Have some rules up front that you all understand. You know, if I'm going to go to a public board meeting, I will let my fellow board members know. And that could be during a board report. That's not a Brown Act violation. You say during the board report, I'm intending this week to go to this and to go to that. Most board members during their board report talk about what they did the last week or 2. I've got boards that talk about what they did the last week or 2 and what's on their calendar for the coming week or 2, which have led to these wonderful moments of, oh, you're going to that? I was going to go to that. And then another board member says, I was going to go to that. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
You know, are we a Brown Act committee? Are we, you know, is there an issue to be had there? So both have rules about how you pass that information, but also pass the information. Another example would be a member of the community comes and talks with you and brings up a serious issue of concern. You know, do you sit on that? Do you wait until the board meeting and throw it out to the board? Usually the best operating practice is either through the superintendent or the board president to, this issue has come up. So it's going through the proper channels. We'll talk a little bit later about a lot of times when somebody comes to you and talks to you and says, I have this problem, here's what's happened in the school. I was charged a fee for this, I don't think legally I can be charged a fee. Or I feel my child is being discriminated against because of their religion or because of their race or because of their disability. Whatever the other issue is, that may be a uniform complaint. Even though you didn't get it in writing, and even though it wasn't submitted to the board on the uniform complaint process, if you start investigating that, if you start looking into it yourself, you may be disqualifying yourself from ever getting to hear anything about it again because you've now become involved with the matter that's being investigated. Timelines may be getting blown because the superintendent doesn't know that this has come in and has to be treated as such. Another example would be somebody says to one of you, I was parked at such and such a school site and a tree branch fell off a tree and hit the top of my car and caused $800 worth of damage. And I'm expecting the district to pay that. If you don't promptly notify the superintendent that that happened, that may be a tort claim. We all think of tort claims as something you get in writing on your form. A verbal claim can be a tort claim to the district that arguably starts your timeline to respond. If you do not within 20 days tell that person, did you mean this to be a tort claim? And if so, was it an inadequate claim? You've given up your right procedurally to argue that it wasn't a claim. So there's all these things that happen which you're not always thinking when you're talking to somebody in the community. Is this a complaint? Is this a claim? Is this a claim against an employee? And if you don't bring those to the superintendent and it can't get processed through and potentially discussed with legal counsel and brought back to the board within your procedures, timelines get blown, rights get affected, liabilities get
So
created.
you're saying in that kind of, because, I mean, not that that particular situation has happened to me, but certainly when people come with a complaint about a school site or something, my response typically would be like, why don't you go talk to the principal or the teacher or whoever and try to direct them to pursue whatever they're talking about, you know, the water fountain down at the OAS field's not working, you know, try to put them on the path where they should be talking to somebody, not telling me, for me to go, you know, out there with my wrench and fix it, or to
Right.
tell somebody about it. So is that the wrong answer? Is
No,
it-
I don't think it's the wrong answer. I think in that circumstance, it's not a bad
But you have to
idea.
kind of think, oh, if this is something that could be perceived as a complaint, then you need to do a little bit more.
Yeah, and it never hurts if in doubt, tell the superintendent. You know,
I typically would.
Yeah, I had this conversation,
know,
and I know that
But a lot of
sometimes-
times I'm trying to also
Not be
sort of
available.
convey to people
Yeah.
that, you know,
Mhm.
right, I'm not the person, like, I'm happy to listen to your complaint, your concern, but, like, here's who you really should be talking to,
Right.
you know,
Well,
and to direct them.
And making clear, I'm not the one who's gonna fix this. It can get fixed at the school site. It eventually could get looked at the district office. We have maintenance and operations people, all of these different people.
Right.
The more you can help train the public, the more you can help train the folks that are out there, that they're telling you this does not mean that you're gonna stop what you're doing and go fix the problem. You may help facilitate getting it to the hands of the right person,
Mhm.
but you're not gonna be the fixer, because again, you're not gonna get your fingernails dirty.
Mhm.
And school boards aren't as bad at this as city councils are terrible at this. People go to city council members and say, I have a very specific need. My specific need is I'm having trouble, and this is typical, with your staff, because I'm trying to get approval for a sign for my liquor store, and your staff is telling me it's too close to the street, it's gonna cost me $12,000 to get a new sign put up, and I'm a taxpayer here and I voted for you. And the city council member will roll up their sleeves and start digging through city ordinances, and they'll go sit down with staff and tell the staff member, well, you know, the planning director, for example, I was reading in our ordinances, I don't agree with your reading of the ordinance. That is not the role of the city council member. And the city council member could go back to the mayor, the city council member could go back to the city manager and say, this issue's gotten raised. I think it's an important issue, I'm concerned about it, I want it to get looked at. We'll talk more later about it, I want it on a future agenda. But city council members are terrible at this, and I say this because we represent some cities too. They need bells. School board members are much better about that, because in city council, they get into these zoning issues where they actually are violating people's legal rights left and right by even having the conversations, because they are the later decision makers on it. So those are things to watch for. The last one on this page I just wanted to mention, because we already discussed it, is to be a successful school board member, you have to work with a team. Because you have no individual authority, you're not going to get a lot done if you're just doing things by yourself. The best way of getting things done is to politely bring your board members along with you, to persuade them that there are issues to be looked at. And at the top of page 15 is just the quote I've used with you at least 10 times already, but now you see where it's from. Board work is head work, hands are optional. That's what that's talking about. You are the governance body, we're not the doing body. And we talked a little bit about the next slide already, from doing to deciding, moving from being an activist in the community and being the one in the trenches to being the one who's making the decision. So no longer are you making the bombing run, you are the one that's deciding who's getting bombed. That's a bad analogy, but it's these military analogies that I like to use. So let's go down then to the bottom of page 15. How do you act after a vote? How do you act after the vote? Because this is really bringing together these issues of trust, board governance, all the different pieces we talked about. Because how you vote, how you behave during your vote and after your vote is probably the easiest way for somebody to gauge, are you functioning as a team or not? Because you will have disagreements, trust me, you will have disagreements. You will have vehement disagreements. Sometimes you'll have vehement disagreements in front of the public. By vehement, I don't mean angry, I don't mean spiteful, I don't mean vengeful. There's that notion that it's not a win-lose situation. We're all trying to do what's best for kids, and assuming that all of the other board members have that same motivation, which helps build that trust piece again. You're all trying to do what's right. You may just see different ways of accomplishing that goal. And it may be what curriculum is going to be offered at the second grade math level. It can get very specific, and it can get very heated. But during the vote, treating each other with respect, listening to each other, interrupting is, my big bugaboo during board meetings. If a board member is saying something and another board member interrupts, there's that loss of respect, there's that loss of trust, and you're inviting the public to start interrupting too. When you have the floor, you have the floor. You know, that's that old thing that you do in families sometimes when you get a piece of floor tile, and the person who's speaking has to hold up the tile, and nobody else is allowed to talk until they put the tile down. That's literally, you have the floor. That's your role as board members. So you act in this respectful way. You disagree strongly, but in a way that listens to one another, that gives each other credit for having good motivations. Then you vote. The question I have here is, when is a unanimous vote important? There are times where you have to seriously consider, if you know it's a 4-1 or a 3-2, vote hasn't been taken yet, but it's very clear from the discussion that's happened, it's a 4-1 or a 3-2. Is it an issue that is worth maintaining your no vote if it's an issue that's of great import to the school district? And I'm going to give you a very specific example because I've been through this before. Hopefully you'll never have to do this. It's the most controversial thing I see, which is votes to close school sites. We're going to close an existing school. You will have 500 parents who go to that school and 500 more who graduated from that school before. In your board meeting, it will be very heated. And there may be discussion about, well, we could keep the school site open, but only if we're incurring $600,000 a year out of our general fund budget to keep it open, because it's not got enough kids to support the principal that's there, the custodian that's there, and everything else. So for one board member, it's a budget issue. For another board member, we want to have neighborhood schools. That's the most important thing, even if we're paying extra out of pocket for it. We want people to be able to walk to their schools. You each have your own strong feelings. If you vote to close a school on a 3-2 vote, that community that's already getting a little bit torn apart and stretched because of how strongly people feel about it, the parents that go to that school desperately don't want it closed. The parents that don't go to that school do want it closed because it's going to save the district $600,000 a year in my example. That's one of those moments. It's up to you as individual board members. You have to decide, do I vote in the majority so that we can try to achieve a unanimous decision, so we can tell the community, I've made my case against this. I would prefer not to do it, but I understand the importance of doing it. I support the move as a district. That's not anything anybody can tell you to do. It's completely up to you. I have it there because I've been through these situations where I've seen board members who have voted for things that they are not fundamentally in favor of because they feel like it's such an important message to get out to the community. Flip side, and Joe, don't listen to this, we had one where a district was unhappy with its superintendent, the board was unhappy with its superintendent, and there was basically a 3-2 split. And an election happened, and the 3-2 split flipped, which happens sometimes. So now there were 3 board members who really felt like it was time for the superintendent to move on, and 2 who really would like to keep the superintendent. The 2 board members, who were both very seasoned board members in the district, saw that and realized that this had to be a unanimous decision. That it was not good for the superintendent at that moment to stay. It wasn't good for the district to keep fighting about it. There had to be a clean break. There had to be a decision made for the superintendent. So what they did, instead of continuing their vote against getting rid of the superintendent, they switched their vote to we support getting rid of the superintendent. One of them was the board president, who spoke individually to the superintendent and said, I'm going to do this not because I think you should be here, but I'm going to do this because we all need to move on, and this is no longer good for you or for us. So I'm going to make a really hard decision, and this was his golfing buddy and somebody he was close to. I'm going to make the hard decision. So it goes both ways, where you do that. And people watch that. But there are also going to be times it's a 3-2 vote, right? It just is, or it's a 4-1 vote. And so the next 2 bullets there are really important ones. How does the minority, how do the 2 react to a 3-2 vote? How does the majority react to the 3-2 vote? And that, almost more than anything else, will define whether you're working successfully as a team or not. Because when you have that 3-2 vote, you can have stated your position as passionately as possible, made your record, tried to persuade everybody you can persuade. It didn't work. It's still a 3-2 vote against you. So after that, do you go out?
Before you go to after that, you have to have time to have a certain amount of discussion on something that important that you were describing. You know, sometimes it feels like we discuss and I'm not sure when we're going to be done, and then all of a sudden it's done. You know, but what you're describing is something that important. You would allow the discussion to go on, I assume, hoping that people would come to one side or the other. So
You want to have enough discussion to air people's views on it. The trick is always that balance We have so many issues in this school district that they can't all be that issue. So it's always a matter of identifying what that issue is. There are districts that on their agendas state, I don't remember if you, I don't think you all do, how many minutes per item are allocated. So you look at an agenda and it will have a mundane issue that you have a presentation on that's allocated 10 minutes. And then you have another issue like a major curriculum issue or changing school attendance boundaries. That's another really big controversial one. You've got an hour. And it's not a statement that you're going to stop at 10 minutes. At 10 minutes you say, we've reached the allotted time, does the board want to continue? And then you decide, do you want to keep it? Sometimes that 10-minute issue becomes the 2-hour issue because somebody raises an issue nobody thought of, or a member of the audience comes forward. But you all need to consider for your rules of engagement again, how you decide how long to spend on an item, how much is enough. Because you got to make a decision eventually. And then sometimes it's just the die is cast, something happened, there's a deadline, you all know you have to do it by that date. I have districts I work with where the boards meet till 1 or 2 in the morning every week. And they have board meetings 3-4 times a month that are 8-9-hour board meetings. That's what they do.
Because they just talk a lot, or do they have tons of things on the agenda?
A lot of it's, I would say it's not the amount of things on the agenda. Because I also work with districts that are large urban districts that have huge agendas whose meetings are always done by 9:30 or 10, and who meet twice a month. And don't need all the extra meetings. It's a cultural issue. So one district, which I would love to tell you the name, but I'm not going to, for the longest time, their culture was just, they talked everything to death. So they would get to the point of taking a vote and they'd say, let's bring it back for another meeting. Let's have a special meeting to discuss it for another day. And they'd have another day of discussions. And at the end of that, it was on as an action item, somebody couldn't make it here tonight, I'd like to put it over to another date. And the next thing you know, it's 6 months down the road, they've spent 100 hours on this issue and it's completely unresolved. Or the circumstances have changed, they have to start over. It is a hard thing to know when things are done. I'm a big fan of being able to say, I need time, I need this to percolate, I need to look at this, I need to study this. But I'm also a big fan of if there's 4 board members or 3 board members who feel like action is needed for a particular reason and they decide to vote, that still goes under how the minority acts under a 3-2 vote. And you could state your objection, I really think we should spend more time on this. I really want more public input. I want the opportunity to go and read the ream of paper we received. You have board meetings sometimes where somebody shows up with a ream of paper. I'm here with you tonight. I sent another attorney from my firm to another board meeting I've been invited to. And she got there and she called me. I was actually texting with her earlier because they arrived there. They're putting up lights on a playfield at a high school. Just one of the most controversial things you can do, believe it or not. You get sued almost every single time.
Only for the surrounding neighbors.
Well, you'd be surprised. This time it's for the Pilots Association. They feel it's going to interfere with landmarks that they long established in the area about nighttime lighting. I didn't understand it. But she showed up at the meeting, and it should not have been controversial. The district had adopted an environmental impact report years ago that called for lighting, but they ran out of money on the project. So they had to wait until there was money. Again, they passed a bond, there's money. They're putting in the lighting. They're doing an addendum to describe the lighting to the original environmental impact report that nobody opposed. Everybody was in favor of it. It was a few years ago. So she showed up, and this attorney is in the audience from the Pilots Association with literally a 6-inch thick binder of argument and evidence why the world will end if they approve this, and why it violates CEQA to move forward that night, California Environmental Quality Act. Because of this new fact, because now there's one of their main things is there's a hospital a few miles away, and they have a flight path for their emergency helicopters that apparently goes near this site, and so the light apparently will be disorienting. I don't even understand the argument. So that was one of those moments. The call that I got was from talking to the attorney in my office, was by the way, was do we move forward with the meeting tonight? We have 6 inches of paper. Nobody's going to read it. So what do we do? And I said, well, there's a lot of people that may be there for the meeting, so maybe the thing to do is have the meeting, but point out that 6 inches of paper were submitted, that you're going to take another 2 weeks, and you're going to come back at the next meeting and you're going to act on it then. The risk being that people watch that, and 2 weeks later that attorney's going to show up with 7 inches of paper. I've been that attorney, honest to goodness, where we're fighting on behalf of a school district with the city, where I'm the one that shows up and tries to kind of lob the grenade by walking in with a pile of documents. I'd like to think I'm not coming in at the last minute as a strategy. It's usually just because that's how long it took to pull together the information. But sometimes people come in as a strategy. So there's no hard and fast answer about how long do you spend. You all have to find how you're going to make sure each person is heard, though, so that if you say, I need more time on this, it's not just dismissed. If somebody else says, no, I think we have to act on it tonight, but that's not just automatically dismissed either, that you're listening to each other and having a dialogue. And factors go into that, factors of how much time have we spent on it already? Is there really new information here? Is there a time frame that we have to get there? Is there some, do we have to do this by the end of the school year and there isn't time? It is always okay to ask for more time.
I mean, just, speaking to this whole point, I mean, if you, have the discussion where everyone gets heard, but you're clear that there's a majority that would support whatever that action item is. I mean, at some point, like, why not vote even if a minority person on that vote wants to talk about it, for 3 more sessions? If you know you have your majority, why not just take the vote? Because if the other 3 or 4 have made up their mind.
Yeah. Well, let me address that. When you know you have the majority is not necessarily the trigger for the vote. It's really when a majority of the board feels like the issue's been fully vetted.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of times, you may have been in the majority from day one. You knew going into it, this is what you were going to do. And as you go through the discussion and everything else, your view has not changed. But you get to the point where you feel like, okay, we're now talking about the same issues we talked about from that last meeting. That may be a moment to call for the vote. And I think you have to allow other people the time to catch up. Everybody digests information differently. It's the classic example of the teacher in the classroom that's teaching reading, and you have some kids who are fast readers and some kids that are slow readers. You can't go so fast that you lose everybody just because the fast readers. You can't go so slow that you lose everybody just because the slow readers. You have to come to some equilibrium where everybody is being addressed. The best school boards I work with, the answer to that question is somebody will say, I think we've now reached that cycle where we're repeating the information. Can we focus? Is there anything new? Is there anything different? Is anybody bringing forward anything we haven't heard before? So you change this dialogue from, we're talking about the same thing again, to, am I missing? Is there something else? Is there something we haven't heard? And then there's going to come a time where somebody calls the order, the motion to order, and you take a vote on it. And somebody may vote against it, and I've seen many board members do this. If I had more time, I might vote for this, but I haven't gotten enough yet to feel comfortable with it. So I may or may not support it, but I have to vote against it because I'm not ready yet. I think we need to take more time, or I think I need more time. That's one of those, how do you then, what do you then do with it? So when that decision gets made, what does the person who needed more time or who voted in the minority in general do with that? Because here they're saying, I need more information. I think that's a delicate dance that you have, that you need to engage in. The person who lost the vote has to recognize they lost the vote. That's the hardest thing to do. I personally, I hate losing. So, we have votes in my family all the time. We have 4 family members. I'm frequently the one in a 3-1 vote, especially about what we're gonna have for dinner. It's hard to let go of those. You don't necessarily have to forget about it. One thing I've seen board members do, not necessarily on the time issue, but on the substance issue, which I really like, is, okay, I see we're gonna take a vote. I think I see where the votes are going. I'd like us to study this more, but I really have concerns about this. Would the person who made the motion entertain amending the motion to say, in 1 year, we will come back and we will look at the data. We will come back a year from now and see, because we're all debating about what might happen over the next year if we do this. 3 of us think success, 2 of us think failure, world's gonna die. Let's come back in a year, and if the answer was it went really poorly for the year, maybe that's the time to reconsider and reopen. If things went swimmingly for the year, maybe that's the time for the people in the minority to say, what's wrong?
We just did that.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is, are people being heard? I mean, that's part of your process. Is the public being heard? Is your staff being heard? Are each of you being heard? So that you know when the board votes no to something that you wanted to do, it's not because they didn't listen to you. They may not have agreed with you, but they gave you your opportunity. There's been enough of the discussion. But that's where process starts kicking in too, where you have a process that says, okay, I think we've reached that point where we've had enough input on it. We need to move off of this topic. If 3 board members feel like it's time to move off of that topic, that was the decision the body made that you're a part of. And that's a incredibly difficult mindset to be in. It's a little bit like, you're doing the rowing and you've all decided, we're going to Baltimore, but you wanted to go to Austin. Well, you better not start rowing to Austin, right? Because you're not going to get anywhere. The boat's going to Baltimore and you're rowing with them now. Why you want to go to Baltimore right now, I don't know.
So
I
Harold,
don't
on
think
this,
the boat would go there right now.
Yeah, I'm
on
trying to
this
think of-
issue, we had an example here where every year, about 6 years ago, every year Pulte would come back to revisit the agreement and cut $1 million off the deal. And then I came onto the board and they came back at us and cut another $1 million off the deal. And I voted against accepting this new revised agreement, but I lost on a 3-2 vote. And the 2 things I wanted to share were, number one, I worked closely with the board president at the time, and I also worked closely with the superintendent on the one issue of, this thing's gonna stack up 3-2 against me, do I just vote for the affirmative because I wanna send the right message to the public that we're working together as a board for the good of the community. And I had to work that through with the board president and superintendent. I voted no, because I had really strong feelings about it, and I feel good about that no vote. But a couple things happened as a result of that I think you were touching on that I wanted to share. Number one was, superintendent, I don't remember if he called me that night or if he called me the next morning to kind of talk me off the ledge, to acknowledge that's tough to be on the losing end of a $20 million no vote, or let's say a differential of $1 million or $2 million. But the superintendent followed up with a phone call to really work through what happened, and I think he handled this well, and I think the board president handled this well. These are the things, this stuff. He let me know this happens in districts. It's okay. This is normal process. And then also working with the board president after the vote. The swing vote on it grabbed a hold of me after the meeting, and she just said, Matt, I think we are closer together on this issue than we're further apart. But I think we got to move forward as a district. I've served for the last 10 years on the board, and we've had 10 years worth of work on this, and we've got boxes. You've seen the boxes of documents on this thing, and that's why I voted the way I voted. But I respect your position on it. You may be right, but I think we got to move forward. So it was really good governance work, both by the superintendent, by Joe, and also by other board members, the board superintendent, and the swing vote person. It was a great example of how to act, winning on the 3-2 vote, and then on the losing on the 2-3 vote, we immediately started in on picking out carpet and talking about parking and all these mundane things. And I had to put on my I'm a member of the team hat and just started looking at carpet. The vote's done. I didn't get elected to pout. You've got to just move on and do the best you can, soldier on as a team.
That's a great example. And I think what I'm hearing from you is you felt heard. You felt listened to. It wasn't that they were disregarding your position. They listened intently to your position. Then what you do with it as the person who's on the losing side of the vote, the classic example, I always have this image in my head. I should bring the picture, but then we give away which district it is. We had a district where there was litigation to try to stop the building of a school, which some people felt was in an environmentally sensitive area. Others of us, like their lawyer, didn't think it was in an environmentally sensitive area. But that was the fight that was going on. And somebody got elected to the board whose husband was one of the main opponents and in fact litigants against the school district. And she was clearly elected with a platform of do everything you can to stop the building of that school. 7-member board, she got on, and there were a lot of 6-1 votes. Every now and then there was a 5-2, but it was mostly 6-1 votes around the school. And all very awkward and difficult. I went to the groundbreaking for that school, and they got a 7-member board. They got a shovel that had 7 handles, if you've ever seen, so everybody can do it. And there's this great picture of the 7 board members with smiles on their faces, pushing the shovel into the ground. And there at the end, because they were just sitting the way they sit on the dais, was the newest board member, was the one whose husband had sued unsuccessfully to stop the project and was elected to stop the project, with a smile on her face. And I can take you to that school right now, and there's a brass plaque on the side of the school with the names of the board members that made it happen, and there was her name. And I remember somebody in the community coming forward and saying, why does her name get to be on there? She voted against it, she fought against it, and I will always remember what the board president said to that person in my presence, which was she was a member of the board. And this was a vote that we did together, we built the school together. And isn't it great that she's here today and smiling? There's ultimate success, right? And I love that picture. And the first few months I looked at that picture, it ticked me off. Because that person, I mean, that district spent $500,000 on my firm, which didn't make me unhappy, but made the district really unhappy, really fighting hard all the way through the Board of Appeals to get that school built. So that's a success story at the end of the day, and the reason it's a success story is the district got, board president got it, the board members got it, even that losing board member got, they were all on one team. And once that decision was made, that decision was made. And years later, that board member would be heard to comment to people that she actually thought that the school could not break. You know, that it was a success and it didn't turn out to be environmentally insensitive and it didn't harm critters and life was good. So this whole how you act during the vote, after the vote, this is an incredibly central part to how you will be perceived as individual board members, how you will be perceived as a board, and whether you're operating as a team. You won't get people there if you don't let them feel heard. That's part of this process. Everybody's voice needs to be equal and needs to be heard. And you won't get there if people can't let it go. And again, as you mentioned, Jason, that you've had an instance where you decided, let's look at it again in a year. Instead of guessing what's going to happen, let's do it for a year and come back and listen. And better when you come back and listen, really listen. And I've seen majorities change because they really do, the year comes in and the evidence is different and it switches. So I would cajole all of you, when you're moving towards a vote, have this discussion in mind. How do I behave during the vote? How am I going to behave after the vote? Once the vote is taken, the decision is made. As a matter of policy, as a matter of law, it's a done deal. And we'll talk a little bit on some of the parking lot issues about how that looks. So what happens if something changes and you want to bring it back? And we'll get back to that one. So I wanted to pause on that for a little while. I like the quote on the next page again from the terribly named book. The time to sound the warning bell is before the vote. All your negative predictions belong before a decision is made. After the final vote, the board should come together to support what is now the district's policy. Now is your time to turn from negative to positive. The hardest thing you've got to do as a board member. I just have to say that. You voted against something and now you have to kind of grit your teeth and get through it. That doesn't mean you can't, again, saying to somebody, this is how I voted on it. And I always like saying, this is how I voted on it. The reasons I voted on it that way, we're on the record. You want to see the minutes. But this is the direction we've taken, and we're going to do everything we can to make it as good a decision as possible. And I'm going to be there with the shovel helping turn the first pile of dirt. And nobody ever challenged that board member, by the way. None of her supporters ever said, wait, you got me elected to stop this, and you were groundbreaking, which was interesting. I'm going to skip now, because we've covered a number of slides, so I'm going to bounce a little bit to number 17. This is just to reiterate some language that comes from this How Not to Be a Terrible Board Member, and from your bylaw. So the bylaw in the middle, this is again about when you're acting as a board member versus an individual. Your bylaw states, when speaking to community groups, the media, or other members of the public, individual board members should recognize that their statements may be perceived as reflecting the views and positions of the board. Board members have a responsibility to identify personal viewpoints as such, not as the viewpoint of the board. So I've been talking to you about that for 3 workshops now. There it is right in your bylaws. That's the policy, that's your rule to live by. Which leads to this wonderful quote down at the bottom. You may be asking yourself, do I have to watch every word I say? The answer is yes, when you're standing before the public as a representative of the district. Here's the hard thing. You are always a board member. When you go home at night, you're a board member. You can say to somebody, I'm here as an individual. I'm here in my individual role. I'm here as a parent. I'm here as a community member. It doesn't matter. You've got board member tattooed on your chest if they know who you are. So even identifying yourself as an individual, you really have to stop and think, am I inserting myself in a situation where any reasonable person is going to, even if I say this, think that I'm here on behalf of the board? So when you find yourself in the situations that arise wherever they arise, you have to stop and think about it. And that goes all the way to things like blogging. You're on a blog and there are people that are saying something about the district and you want to fire something back. Is that going to be viewed as you individually or as you as a board member? So if it's, I can't believe the community is still talking about this. This is not an issue that's important to the district. It's, love Matt Moran
I've only done that once.
on a blog. There you go. But you put that out there. It doesn't matter. If you ended that with, I'm saying this is my individual opinion, not as a board member, it's hard for people to separate it. And then the hardest one is when people say, I'm saying this as an individual person, not a board member, and then they sign it, love Matt Moran, Orinda Union School District or Union School Board. You really have to try to keep that divide as much as possible. And before you find yourself on the secret mission behind enemy lines, make sure you were the right one to be sent on the secret mission behind enemy lines. Meaning, gosh, the district wants to have somebody attend something so that we can see what's happening with the city committee. Are you the right one to go there? If you just sit there quietly, are they going to think you're there as a representative of the district? If you stand up and say, I'm here tonight in my individual capacity, not on behalf of the district, are they going to perceive it that way? So those are issues you've got to think about. That's life in the fishbowl again. Just help. So continuing on from that, I'm going to come back to, so we're going to skip page 18 for now, and just take you through a few more points before we get to the parking lot issues. And we'll take a break before the parking lot issues because I believe in such things. So personnel, I just wanted to reiterate something we've talked about with your board policies. This is the same as every board policy in every school district in the state that I'm aware of. The superintendent has the primary responsibility for overseeing the district's personnel system. The superintendent locates candidates for positions. The superintendent deals with employees who are having problems. If you see issues that you have concerns about, you can go to the superintendent, and if you think the superintendent's not doing a good job with it, that is an issue for the superintendent's evaluation. So, for example, if you feel that you guys don't have a director of communications, right? I want to pick an office you don't have. Some larger districts, the big urban districts, have directors of communication. The board may be unhappy with how the director of communication is doing, or a board member may be unhappy. The person to take that up with is the superintendent. And to tell the superintendent, one of the things we are establishing as a goal for you, superintendent, for you to achieve, you need to make our director of communications be a better public speaker, for example. You hired this director of communications who is out there giving speeches on behalf of the district that are not very articulate. So maybe they need some coaching. Or maybe it's not the right fit, and you may need to address that issue. If the superintendent isn't doing what you feel should be done about that, that's an issue for superintendent's evaluation. We asked you to do something about this employee and nothing's getting done about the employee. They're not improving. We wanted you to give them tools to get better. That's the role, and that's the hard job for the superintendent because they're the kind of, they've got on both sides. They're dealing with the board and their feelings on it, and the other side as well. When a board, and I will just tell you this up front, when a board tells a superintendent, you're going to hire this person, we found the person, or we've decided, that our director of communications left, there's a principal we think would be great for this. We've talked to the principal about it. We want you to hire the superintendent. When you do that, directly or indirectly, the following happens. That person becomes the director of communications. You've lost the trust of your superintendent. The superintendent has lost the trust of the staff of the community because they no longer think the superintendent's involved with this process. The respect levels have kind of gone to the wayside as well. And what ends up happening is if that person doesn't work out, how do you go to the superintendent and say, do something about it? Because the appropriate response from the superintendent is, I didn't want to hire this person to start with. This is the board's candidate, and this is the board's person. So I don't know what I can do. I can try. But you've just lost the ability to hold your executive officer accountable for hiring and firing in the district, which is something as a board you want. You want to evaluate the superintendent on how they're doing at that and how their cabinet is doing on that. So it's a little trap that gets late. So I wanted to visit on that for a moment.
Question.
Yeah.
What you just mentioned a minute ago about if there was a situation and you felt that was personnel that wasn't being handled, then that's an issue for the superintendent evaluation. But are you saying wait till the end of the year? Because, maybe there's, it's January or whatever.
You don't have to evaluate once a year. So if you feel that there is, if the superintendent comes forward and says, I have a principal who I feel is just not doing the job, I need to do something about this. He may come to you and say, I need a category in closed session, employee discipline, dismissal, release, complaint, which is what the Brown Act says you can do, to come in and talk to you about what's going on, because I may need to exit this principal, random example. He doesn't wait for the annual evaluation of the principal. The same thing is true if the board has concerns about the performance of the superintendent, you can discuss that. You'll want to look at the contract you have with the superintendent, just like you look at the contracts for everybody else, to make sure everything's being done properly. as far as what the process is. There's rules. I've got a school board that's meeting Thursday, and it's terrifically awkward because a member of the community has filed a complaint against the superintendent and the CBO. So the superintendent and CBO stepped out of it. The HR director's handling it, working with our office. And I had to contact the district to say, you're having the board listen to a charge, look at evidence of a charge against the CBO and the superintendent. Maybe groundless, but it's a charge. Under the Brown Act, they have to get 24 hours notice of that and the opportunity to have it be moved into open session and be heard. That's what the Brown Act says when you're hearing a charge or complaint. So we have this awkward thing where the person who sends those notices out is, guess what, the superintendent. So we're having to go to the board president, to have the board president sign it, to send the notice to the superintendent, to let the superintendent know that they have the right. It gets very complicated around that. They're not waiting on that until the evaluation. There's been a complaint brought, they're listening to the complaint. If a board member has a complaint or charge against the principal or superintendent, and Joe, sorry to pick on you as the superintendent, but if you feel the superintendent has an issue, they get all those same rights. So just like happened in this other district, if you want to bring up a concern with the board in closed session under employee discipline, dismissal, release, you may be able to do so, but the superintendent may get 24 hours notice and a right to be heard, and there's process to be followed, but it's not necessarily just the once a year event. Two other topics I want to cover before I break briefly. One of them is just tips for handling concerns and complaints, and we talked about this a little bit. I just wanted to reiterate some of these points. Remember, if somebody comes to you with a complaint, you're only hearing one side. It's really easy when a member of the community comes to you with an issue and says this terrible thing is happening. I know where I go. I'm just like, oh, that sounds terrible. It's a little bit like listening to the news when they're only reporting one side of the news. And you listen to it, you go, that's terrible. And then you find out there's another side to the story. So remember, you have to wait to get both sides to make a judgment. We talked about this a little bit, Julie, directing the person to the appropriate staff and the appropriate procedures. I have the words here, honor the process. That's like a mantra. You can just honor the process. There's a process to be followed, follow it. Treating everybody fairly and equally. You don't meet with one constituent group, right, to listen to them complain about one side and not meet with another constituent group to hear them complain about the other side. That is not good governance in its essentials. And then treating complaints consistently. Everybody, whether it's, I was talking about that district, the CBO and the superintendent, the district is doing the right thing. They're treating it the same way as if it had been a complaint against a teacher or a complaint against a board member. Everybody gets treated equally in that regard, which is important. And then a word on whistleblowing that kind of goes with the concerns and complaints. What do you do when the whistleblower moment happens? Somebody comes forward, by the way, this other district, that's exactly what's happened. The person who's raising these issues is a whistleblower. Sometimes it's a dog whistle so nobody can hear it. You have to actually process it in the same ways. So you want to take appropriate action. You don't want to stay silent. I heard this complaint. I'm not bringing it to the superintendent's attention. I didn't take it seriously. Don't make that judgment. Bring it to the attention of the superintendent. Follow the appropriate chain of command. So if it's about staff, you go to the superintendent. If it's about the superintendent, you go to the board president. If it's about a board member, you go to the board president. If it's about the board president, you may have to go to either the board vice president, you may have to go to the superintendent, you may have to go to legal counsel at that point. We had a district where the board president was a serial Brown Act violator. Just couldn't help it. Copy everybody and reply all. It was constant, it was endless. And eventually, one of the board members just didn't know what to do with all of this and didn't want to run to the district attorney and say, I think we're violating the law. So they went to the superintendent, they called me in, and we really talked about, do we have to self-report to the district attorney's office? How do we go about it? That was a rare case where we actually self-reported. We went to the DA and we said, we think we violated the Brown Act, and here's how it happened. Because if you ever want to get leniency on a Brown Act violation, that's the best way to start it up. And in that case, the DA ended up admonishing not the board, not the district, but the individual board member who finally got the message and stopped getting reply all. Well, slowed down not getting reply all. So that's a little bit on whistleblowing. There's these points on the top of the next page. Don't jump to conclusions. Don't violate the Brown Act. The initial response is, oh, I just heard this terrible thing. I'm going to tell the board. I am speaking to this board on Thursday where one of the things I'm going to be talking to them about is this whistleblower event has happened, and the board members are all emailing each other. You know, oh my God, did you hear about this? And what are we gonna do? We need to have a meeting. Just Brown Act issues abound. So don't go that direction. Don't prematurely go to the press. So I see smoke, I'm going to the press. I'm gonna run to law enforcement officials. Try to process what's happening before, this train starts running in a way that may have all been started with rumor. And open the door to district or personal liability. You don't want to take actions where you're defaming somebody, where you're kind of getting out ahead of everybody else. That's where you work with your legal counsel. That's where you work with your superintendent. And then the last thing before our break, and we actually will have covered everything other than the protocols we'll come back to. Just a word on board member liability. I can't do governance workshops because I'm a lawyer without telling you all the ways that you can get in trouble for things that you do. And we talked about the Brown Act before, and you violate the Brown Act, it can actually be criminal misconduct if you leak information from closed session, and it's done for pecuniary gain. It can lead to fines and criminal conduct. There's a general rule that applies to you that you need to be aware of, though, which is if you are acting in your role as a board member, so you're doing what you were charged by the board to do, and you're out there and you're doing that, and somebody sues you and or the district over it, the district is obligated to provide you with defense and indemnification, which means they're going to provide you with a lawyer at district expense, and it may be a lawyer of your own choosing. That's something that you get to work out with the district, and if there's a judgment against you, they're going to pay it. I call that the you don't lose your house rule, right? That they can't go after your personal assets. You are acting within the scope of your duties. And the citations from your bylaw and the government code that address this are there. What your bylaw says is, no board member shall be liable for harm caused by his or her act or omission when acting within the scope of district responsibilities. It is therefore all the more important for your own self-protection to know, as what I'm doing at this moment with whatever I'm doing, does the district know I'm doing it? Am I charged with doing it? Was I told not to do it? Where do I fall with that? Because if it could be shown you're not acting within your own authority, it then becomes the vote of the board to decide whether they want to defend and indemnify you. It's no longer they must. They get to select, do they or don't they? There's some situations, obviously, if you go and you commit a criminal act, the board's actually prohibited from defending and indemnifying you. And I've been through these before, where somebody gets sued. I'm thinking I have a face in my mind of a particular matter I dealt with, where the district got sued because of something that a board member, in fact the board president, went out and did, without anybody else in the district knowing they were doing it. And at the end of the day, the board had a really hard time deciding. He was acting in a way that he felt was in the best interest of the district. He was doing something that he thought was the right thing to do, but he was doing it on his own, and he was doing it without authority, and it really sort of pushed the boundaries of what a board member is authorized to do. And all of a sudden, that became a problematic issue. And there was a real tough time deciding whether the district decided in the end to pick up the defense, but not the indemnification. They sort of split the baby. They paid for the lawyer to defend the lawsuit, but if the board member was found liable, they weren't going to pay for that judgment, which was significant. Fortunately, the case settled for a fairly de minimis amount of money, and that board member actually paid some of that settlement out of pocket by his own motion, which was a good thing. So that's a little bit of that liability. We already touched on the board member liability for disclosing information for pecuniary gain. And then I'm going to leave you before our little break. We can have maybe a 7 or 8 minute break. With the final thought I always have to have at the end of every one of these discussions, which is from the same book again, this great book, Great Boards Celebrate. Most boards, if rated on a scale of joyfulness, would rank somewhere just above a gathering of morticians. Celebrate, look for excuses to celebrate. I have to always leave you with that with governance, because you deal with all these gnarly, difficult, hard issues, and you have emotional moments, and you forget to celebrate. My favorite board meeting I've been to in the last year or two, I showed up, I can tell you the district, it's a good thing. I showed up to the Livermore Unified School board meeting, and I walked in the room, and there were all these kids sitting there. And so I knew there was some event going on with all these kids sitting there, and 4 of them were wearing particularly nice clothing and had stringed instruments with them. And what it was that the board was starting by honoring all of the musicians who competed in a California Music Educators Association competition. And they brought in a string quartet that had won command performance, which is perfect scores, and you get invited back to perform for the judges, to open the meeting by doing the Pledge of Allegiance and then playing the piece that they played. It was about a 4-minute long Bach piece. It was gorgeous. It was spectacular. The whole mood of that meeting was different than most meetings I go to. Everybody had a smile on their face. Everybody was excited, and I asked afterwards, why did you guys do that? What, was it the music director that came to you? What was it? And they said, no, one of our board members heard that we had a string quartet that got command performance, and said, let's bring them in to play for the board. We don't think like that, right? We're too busy conducting the business of the district. Celebrate what goes on in the district, celebrate what goes right with the board, celebrate each other's birthdays. If there's a birthday around the board meeting, have a cake. It's amazing what that does for the team and for the community. But now I'm gonna give you a break, as I said I would. So 5, 6 minutes? is
Yes,
that-
about quarter till.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Harold.
You made it. You made it. I told you we would.